hesitated to share research about parents with you this week because with the pandemic and everything that's going on, things are not typical and parents are not in schools and working with schools the way that they normally do. However, the more I reflected on it, the more I realized I think the research that I'm about to share today is even more important given the circumstances that we're all in right now. Hello, my name is Courtney. Welcome back to my channel where we discuss educational research one study at a time so that you can incorporate it into your practice. So my own research focuses a lot on parents, specifically mothers, and so I could go on and on and on about the theory and the data about parents and families and mothers and how it all relates to the school, but we don't have 3 years to talk about it. So I will focus on one of the seminal pieces that I have used in the past and share it with you today because I think it could be really valuable to where we all are right now. This book is called Mothering for Schooling, and it was published in 2005. The research was done in the 80s, but the theory and the findings from this research are still very relevant to the context of schools that exist today. Just a quick disclaimer too, I'm not trying to exclude fathers from the discussion of education. The research in this book focuses specifically on mothers. There is a section that gets devoted to fathers, but for the sake of remaining in the scope of what the researchers are talking about, we're going to focus on mothers. The authors conducted research in 2 different cities so that they could get an understanding of differences in socioeconomic status, and most of their data comes from interviews with mothers, a few interviews with some fathers, and then there's also some information from educational stakeholders. What I really love about this study is how detailed it is. The authors did a great job of going into a lot of depth about the topics that they are talking about so that you can really see a well-rounded idea of what's happening when parents engage, or I should say when mothers engage with schools. The first chapter gives some background on the roles and the historical roles of mothers, the economy, and education, and just builds a case for why we need to be talking about what we're talking about and where sort of some of the ideas about motherhood and schooling have come from. The second chapter talks about how the idea of mothering came to be and how mothers are framed up, and it does this by showing the historical roots of motherhood and the mothering work that mothers do. And so it used to be that mothering activities were passed down from mothers to daughters, and they shared how to best do that work. And then there was a historical shift that happened where experts started taking over that job, and soon motherhood was put into the scientific realm. And so you could be a good mother or a bad mother. It wasn't just this oral tradition that was passed on. It was, here's what we expect from mothers, and if you don't measure up, you're not a good mother. And so when we relate this to schools, how well a mother does at her job determines how well a student should be behaving in school and performing academically. So if a student is struggling in school socially or academically, then it must be the mother's fault, right? Because these experts have set the bar for what mothering should entail and how well mothers should be doing their job. And if a child isn't measuring up, well, then the mother must not have done their job properly. And unfortunately, we've heard this before. We've probably maybe even participated in this before. I think the best example comes right after parent-teacher interviews when you walk into the staff room and you see a teacher go, apple, tree. And so judgments are made, and you may have even participated in this in the past, but my hope with sharing this research with you is that you will see things from a bit of a different perspective, and perhaps your views of motherhood and the role that parents play with schools will shift just a little bit. This chapter also explains that a lot of the work that mothers do is for the benefit of the school, although they don't get any say in what happens at school or how things take place at school or what work they should be doing with their children. So mothers are working to benefit the schools. They don't get a say in what this work is, and if they don't do it, either by choice or by circumstance, they are going to be judged harshly. One quote from this book that I think is really important to hear is as follows. In all its varieties, the mothering discourse has this in common. It requires the subordination of women's unpaid labor and her conditions of her life to the ill-defined needs of her children's development and of their schooling. So nobody's asking the mothers if they have time to do any of this. if they want to do any of this, if they see value in it, if they have conflicting schedules that don't allow them to do any of the work that needs to happen for schools. They're just expected to do it, and it's not paid, and I would not even hesitate to say that it's not valued, although schools greatly benefit from it. So I think that this is a good time to think about what we're asking of our parents right now. If we are in schools that are face-to-face and parents aren't welcome into the school building, that's understandable. There are safety things that have to take place, but how are we still connecting with parents and showing them that they are valued? Are we seeking their input in things that are taking place academically for their students? I know we can't really offer them input in terms of health and safety protocols right now, but there are other areas that we can try to reach out to parents. If we're working remotely, what burdens are we placing on parents? Are they having to print things off all the time? Are they having to learn new technology? In some ways, we can't change everything that's going to happen, and we do need parents to do the unpaid work that we are asking of them. But I think the least we can do is acknowledge and thank them for everything that is being done, and recognize that the work that they are doing to support their students is also work that is supporting us as educators. And so I think never forgetting the role of the parent is really important in our practice today, especially with everything going on with the pandemic and hopefully when things return back to normal. This point is also one that really made me want to share more information about parents and start a channel like this where we talk about actual research, because I was participating in a webinar and I wasn't the speaker or anything, I was just a passive participant. And the person was talking about ways that he got a whole bunch of students to do exactly what he wanted in terms of behavior. He had them repeat things and do all these actions so that they were just kind of like tiny robots who would just do whatever he wanted them to do. And that was cool. It was not really my style, but cool. And then he talked about how this works to actually train parents too, and it would be so great if we could just get parents to blindly follow exactly what we wanted them to do instead of cause a ruckus in the schools by having, I don't know, opinions about their children's learning. So it crushed my soul to hear that information, and it made me really want to share more information with everybody that is research-based and not just somebody's opinion about how things should be done. So let's get back into the actual study. Sorry for that tangent. Chapter 3 talks about the coordinating and scheduling that parents need to do just to be able to send their kids to school, let alone help them thrive in it. So to send your kids to school, remotely or not, you've got to get them up at a certain time so that they can start school at the time that they have been told they need to start school. You've got to make sure that they're dressed a certain way, that they have their lunch, that they have not forgotten their homework or their mittens or anything like that. And you have to do it all based on when the school tells you to. If you work, the school doesn't really care what your work schedule is. If you start work 10 minutes before school starts, well, you're gonna have to find a way to make sure that your kid is safe for those 10 minutes, because the school is not going to adjust their schedule for your work schedule. And this has an impact on things like holidays. If you want to take a few days off, you have to make sure that you find the correct form and fill it out. You have to make sure that you can get to the school to fill out the form, or contact the right person to make sure that they can give you the form so that you can send in an electronic signature if your school allows electronic signatures. And don't even get me started if you're late for school, because if you're running late, you have to enter through the main doors, not the side doors. You have to wait for the national anthem to end. You have to get the appropriate entrance slip and get your kid into school that way, and then exit through the correct doors again, all while you know you're being judged for your child being late. It's a whole thing. And I get from a teaching perspective and from a policy perspective why we have to have these things, but it still doesn't make it any easier for parents. And then again, of course, there are obviously going to be disparities for people who take up different socioeconomic statuses. So if you are somebody who has a job where there's flex time and you can be a few minutes late, great. If you're on piecework or you have to punch in a clock, which tend to be jobs where people are in lower socioeconomic statuses and earning lower wages, then you have to get to your job on time, and so you have to do some extra work to make sure that your child is taken care of in those minutes that you can't be with them. The point that the authors are trying to make in this chapter is that mothers have to conform to the schedules that the schools dictate. And if they struggle with that, or they can't make those schedules work, then they are blamed when they struggle to conform. Chapter 4 explains the complementary educational work that mothers do or don't do that can support the school. So for example, if a mother is able to send her child who might be a struggling reader to a tutoring program after school, well, that frees up a lot of resources. The teacher doesn't have to spend as much time one-on-one with the student, the school doesn't have to provide extra remedial support for the child, and the school benefits overall. And again, there are some severe disparities that can happen depending on a mother's socioeconomic status. If she doesn't have the money to be able to afford extra tutoring, or if she doesn't have the time because she's working, then the school is missing out on this added benefit and has to catch up the child, even though it is kind of the school's job to educate the student. So really what the author's point here to drive home is that schools benefit by parents taking on their jobs for them in a lot of situations, and the parents who are able to take on this work are parents who tend to be of higher socioeconomic status. And remember, the work that the mothers do is unpaid, but the benefits that the school received are real and tangible. Chapter 5 looks at the complementary educational work of both mothers and fathers who are employed. So this chapter is a little bit different because it looks at fathers, and it's also looking at specifically parents who are employed. And what the authors noticed is that employment can be a barrier, or it can be something that benefits the school. So in some cases, employment provided enough money for parents to be able to afford things like quality childcare and extra tutoring or extracurriculars that really helped a student out in school, which in turn really helped out the school in terms of their resource allocation. In other cases, though, employment proved to be a barrier because it limited the time that parents had with their children to focus on educational activities in the home and to focus on the coordinating and the getting it together to just get your kid to school aspect of parenting. So in this study, and again, this is not a generalization to the whole population, and remember, this data was collected in the 80s when the parenting world was quite a bit different, particularly for fathers, than it is now. But in this study, fathers were categorized as either being in an passive but interested role in terms of their child's education or an active role. So those were the two markers that the researchers were assigning to different fathers that they interviewed. And they noticed that socioeconomic status really played into what a father's role was when it came to supporting their child in their education. Fathers in the middle class tended to be more active in their child's education, whereas fathers in the lower socioeconomic statuses tended to be interested but more passive than active. So they wanted to help their children, they saw the benefits of helping them, but they weren't active in working with their children. And again, this is most likely because they had to work and they had other things going on that they just couldn't do what they were interested in doing. It doesn't really matter what you hope to be able to provide for your kids. There are only 24 hours in a day. And if you are working from 3 to 11 because that's your shift, well, you're not going to be able to help your children study for that spelling test or practice their times tables. This is why I lost the spelling contest at school, because I couldn't spell believable because my mom was working in the morning when I was trying to practice my words before I left that day. She would start work before we went to school, and so if we didn't get in all of our mom school needs at nighttime, we didn't get them. If that story didn't make sense to you, go check out my video on spelling that I will have linked here in the card. Chapter 6 looks at the different perspectives that come from school boards when they were interviewed about parents and how parents interact with schools. And this research really broke down the socioeconomic status again because there were very different perspectives depending on the socioeconomic status of the area that the school was in. In the middle class areas, schools tended to put more demands on parents to work with their students and to be involved in various ways, whereas in lower socioeconomic status areas, those demands weren't put on parents, and it was speculated that this was because the schools didn't believe that the parents would meet those demands, so why put them on them in the first place? Another really interesting and kind of scary finding that the authors noticed was that in the middle class schools, teachers and educators tended to interact with parents when they were working with them, whereas in lower socioeconomic status areas, teachers might send homework for parents to do with their kids, and the parents might do that work, but that interactive element of it was lost, which I think is such a shame. So relationships were being forged between parents and educators in the middle class for socioeconomic status, but no relationship was really being developed or honed in the schools in lower socioeconomic status areas. Now, again, because this research was collected a long time ago, it might be that perhaps the parents and educators wanted to connect in lower socioeconomic status areas but couldn't because parents had to work or there were scheduling conflicts. My hope is that now with technology, this can be eradicated a little bit because there's no excuse for not being able to connect with a parent, at least virtually or digitally. It might not be face-to-face, but we can all send emails and messages back and forth instantaneously now. So my hope is that technology has saved the day a little bit in this case. Let me know down below, do you see interactions with parents and do you see differences based on the neighborhood that the school is in? I would love to know what your experiences are in this case. Administrators were also a little bit choosy about what counted as welcomed involvement from parents. So administrators were all for parents coming into the school and volunteering with reading programs or helping their kids with homework or watching performances when there was a school concert. But when it came to parents offering opinions such as who they wanted their child to have next year as a teacher, the administrators really didn't take kindly to that kind of involvement. So come, make yourself visible in the school. We love parents. Come on in, help us out, help the kids read, watch the concerts. We want to foster a great relationship with parents. Oh, you have an opinion on something? Oh, no. We do not want opinions. We just want you to come in here and be visible so it looks like we really care, but we don't actually want to hear what you have to say. If you could just do what we tell you to do, that would be fantastic. Does that sound familiar? In chapter 7, the authors return to their definition of work that they have operationalized, and they apply it to the home because their case was that work done in the home is still work, it's just not paid work. And the definition that they used for work was what is done intentionally under definite material conditions and taking definite amounts of time. The authors also talk about the engine of inequality and how schools are a bit of an engine of inequality because they benefit from unpaid work that parents do, but they don't give back. So they benefit and they make demands, and they benefit and they make demands, and parents are expected to meet these demands, but they're never brought into the conversation of what these demands might be. And schools also don't acknowledge that it might be harder for certain parents, particularly those in lower socioeconomic statuses, to be able to meet these demands than it is for other parents who have more financial resources available to them. So there you have it. I know this year is a little bit different in terms of parents being visible in our schools, but my hope is that with everything that's going on, we can take what we've learned today and pay a little bit extra attention to the demands that we're putting on parents and what we are expecting of them. And I understand that there are safety requirements and all of that, but at least acknowledge that what parents are doing is work. It's unpaid. They didn't get a say in it, and in many cases, they are trying their best. If you are a parent, thank you for all that you do to support us as educators. I would like to formally thank you for making lunches, packing your child's homework, finding the mittens that are laid around the floor and matching them up for each kid, getting them to school each day, making sure that the permission forms are returned and that you've signed everything. And I know that all of these things are little tiny things, but I know that in the course of your day, they add up to a lot. So thank you so much for the work that you do. And educators, I hope that you can chime in the comments and thank parents as well for all of these things that work together that really make our days as educators possible. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up so that it can reach a wider audience. As well, consider sharing it with a colleague that you think might benefit from it. And I will see you next week. Have a great day. Bye.